President Trump is pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. How will the panelists deal with that?
Thank you. How will the panelists deal with President Trump wanting to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement? I'm going to ask everyone to deal with this briefly so we can get one more question in before 9 o'clock. Tim Farron.
Right, we'll talk about Brexit being a huge threat or whatever you think. There's nothing bigger as a threat to our country, to our children's future, than the threat of climate change. You're worried about immigration? You see the mass movement of people as our land is desiccated and deluged by that climate change. So the reality is simply this. If it is simply for hair shirt, muesli-eating Guardian readers to solve climate change, it ain't going to solve the problem. We're all stuffed. So let's do something that will actually make a difference. And that means a nationwide, indeed a planet-wide, concerted effort to build the future that we need. So for Britain, what can we do? We can make ourselves energy self-sufficient in renewable energy. 95% of the supply chain of energy in this country, of wind, tidal and marine and coastal energy, is British made. Why not rebuild our economy whilst guaranteeing our children's future?
Thank you. Caroline Lucas.
Well, I just want to thank that so much for that question, because the Green Party has been trying to get climate change onto this election campaign agenda for the past 6 weeks. It has been impossible, so thank you so much for that. It is a vital question. It is the greatest threat that we face. And I think, first of all, in terms of what we do to President Trump, I'm trying to think of a polite answer, but I think essentially what we need to do actually is ignore him, because the economics behind renewables is already such that we know that renewables are going to be cheaper than the fossil fuels that they already replace. So that revolution is already happening. But what we need to do in this country is an awful lot more than is being done by this government or indeed previous ones. First of all, we need to leave 2/3 of all known fossil fuels in the ground if we're to have any hope of avoiding catastrophic climate change. That means a massive investment in renewable energy, energy efficiency. Amber Rudd, of course, was the Energy Secretary for a while, but under her, we did not see the kind of transition we urgently need to see if we're serious about climate change. So we do need to see keeping fossil fuels in the ground, not giving fossil fuel subsidies. We need to see no fracking, not the kind of fracking that is being planned all around the country under this government. We also need to see an end to massive airport
I'm going to stop you, Caroline Lucas, because
there's lots more to say.
I want to turn to Paul Nuttall.
Well, President Trump is doing what he set out to do. I mean, he is the leader of the free world, whether we like it or not. He said during his election campaign that he would withdraw from the Paris Agreement. What he's doing is he's looking at India and he's looking at China, who've got huge coal-fired power station building programs, which are taking place at this present moment in time.
He's doing the right thing, then?
He's looking at the US economy, and he promised to look after the Rust Belt and working class people, and he knows that if they reduce energy bills, and they will do that by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, then he will protect the American economy. He's putting America first, and frankly, I think Britain should put Britain first as well.
So you'd want to see Britain doing the same then?
Well, you know, we are only to blame for 2% of global emissions. And what's going to happen is if energy prices continue to go up, companies will move to countries with lower environmental
standards. Jeremy Corbyn.
We should absolutely adhere to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and we should urge the American people to press their government, their Senate, and their House, and their President to adhere to it as well. And in this country, we are determined to achieve 60% of renewable energy by 2030. We're also determined to reduce emissions, but it's not just about climate change emissions. It's also about our attitude towards the environment, levels of air quality and air pollution in our cities, which are not being addressed by this government. And also, when we did have a growing and thriving solar power industry in this country, what did they do? Cut the feed-in tariffs, which destroyed and damaged a lot of that industry.
Amber Rudd.
We need a different approach.
Amber Rudd. The UK's own official advisors say that your government's not on track to meet the pledge of cutting emissions 80% by 2050. Why not?
I'm going to answer the first question, if I may, about the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and I must tell you, I am disappointed. Caroline is right. I led the UK delegation to get that international agreement of 180 different countries pledging to that reduction. And it is disappointing that the Americans are pulling out. But I hope that we can use our relationship with President Trump and our close relationship with the US to try and influence, to try and make sure they nevertheless take the right step.
Tell him he is wrong.
That's not quite how diplomacy works.
The reason you need to Why are we losing our target?
The reason why I'm optimistic is because there has been such substantial investment in renewable energy, and yes, in solar. It is increasingly doesn't need a subsidy. So because of that investment, it makes good economic sense as well as good renewable.
What about air pollution? What about air pollution?
This is terrible.
Take the vote over air pollution. What about air pollution?
This is terrible leadership on the part of Donald Trump. It's also appalling leadership on behalf of the Prime Minister, who can't even be bothered to come here and answer these questions for herself today. But it's no surprise either. He was very clear during his election campaign what it was he would be about in terms of climate change, and he is sticking to his line. But he is wrong, and the world needs to tell him he is wrong.
It's bad business. It's bad business.
Angus Robertson.
So to answer the question, I'm more than disappointed. I'm appalled that President Trump has walked away from a global approach to one of the biggest challenges that we face at home and abroad. And what he's done is what many of us fear he's going to do in a number of different ways. He's walking away from having a multilateral approach, working together with other countries to deal with serious problems. And that's why if the UK had a special relationship with the United States, and we remember, of course, the first trip that was made by Theresa May was to see a climate change denier, namely Donald Trump. What kind of influence was used by the Prime Minister then to make sure that he didn't go forward with this disastrous step? Absolutely nothing. This is a government that has got rid of the climate change responsibility at the cabinet table. It is absolutely appalling. So what we need to do is we need to do everything that we can at home. I'm delighted that more than 50% of all electricity generated in Scotland is now through renewables. We would have loved to have gone ahead with carbon capture and storage until Amber and her colleagues scrapped it. So there's much more that can be done. So the Prime Minister and her government need to take climate change seriously in a way that they haven't done in recent years. And we need to impress on all of our international colleagues that we need to work together and get this global challenge sorted.
Thank you for all the responses to that.